On the 6th of April, 1944, I picked up my things at the Wallings, my friends from Florida, and traveled into Philadelphia proper. Took a room at the University Club, which the Navy had taken over during the war for itinerant officers. And next morning I drove, or rather I took the train over the bridge to Camden, New Jersey, and checked in with New York ship, Sup Ships there for the first time. New York ship was one of the biggest shipyards in the world. In fact, they held, during the war, the world's record for the number of tons of shipping produced in 1 year. And they made all the good stuff, the aircraft carriers, the battleships, and the cruisers, and so on. However, I wasn't going to be assigned to that one. I was only a lowly ensign, and ensigns didn't make the grade there. So I got assigned to a little group called the Board of Survey, and which was a group that moved around to the outlying yards, other yards. They also built ships, but smaller ships, service ships mainly. And these, in order to be sure that they had been made to specifications, we put them through some seagoing tests and made sure that they were met all the obligations under the contract. Curiously, the very first one I went to was a little shipyard in Leesburg, Virginia, with my group. And this is the very first one I had done. This was a little shipyard that had normally, before the war, only built oyster boats. These were about 50 feet long and drew only about 4 feet of water. And was located up a long creek with full of oysters, incidentally. And but they couldn't get material to build oyster boats during the war, so they bid and got one, a pretty good sized ship. It's aircraft. It's rescue tugs. They're seagoing vessels, about 150 feet long and about 15 feet deep. And again, their works was up at the end of this long creek. And because it was tidal, and well, we had to wait till we wanted to catch a high tide going out, since it was already too much depth. And we got there about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was dark outside. The guy who was what do you call him, the guy who was going to guide him out through the channel hadn't arrived yet, so we just adjourned to the warm room and had a cup of coffee until he got there. So eventually he did. He came up in his little boat, tied up alongside the ATR, the big ship, and we started to warm up the engines and so on. Now the engine in an ATR is a monstrous thing. It's about 10 or 12 feet high. It's as big as a room. It's a triple expansion steam engine, and runs on low pressure steam. Now this, of course, had never been seen on an oyster boat, and but anyhow, they undertook to build it, and the supervisor of shipbuilding was around to be sure it got built right. So we warmed up, while the engines were warming up. I might describe it just a little bit how a triple expansion steam engine works. It has feed water like for a boiler. It's a very pure water. You generate steam in the boiler, and the boiler, about 200 pounds of steam. It goes through 3 stages of pistons, and then goes to the condenser to cool it down into water again, which goes back in the feed tank. Now it's cooled by seawater or river water, wherever it might be, which comes in, goes through tubes through the condenser, so it's a continuous process. So we got ready to go, and the pilot goes up to the takeover and guide us out, and he looks over the side to where he had left his little boat, and all that was sticking out of the water was the top of the mast. It turned out that he had tied up right under the exhaust from the condenser. It had filled up his boat. It was going down to the bottom, the rest of there. So we couldn't leave until we got that thing taken care of. And then we started down. The hull number of this boat was 13. It was the ATR 13. It was the 13th one I've ever built. Well, all people who work around the sea, it seems, are very superstitious. And they just knew that 13 would come to a no good end.
Yeah.
Many navies of the world never built a 13 ship because of that superstitions. The British tried to break that once in a century earlier, and only wound up by reinforcing it when the boat left port and was never heard of again. However, the U.S. Navy would not give in to that, and so we built the 13, and we were sailing it down this little creek, and just tearing up all of the oysters on the bottom all the way down through it. And the surrounding people who were fishermen and people who lived there were furious. They were throwing things at it as we went downstream and cursing and so on. But we finally got it down, and I guess the rest of the test went okay. I can't remember because I was too overwhelmed with the whole thing then, and I didn't have any tests to run anyway. I just recorded. But that shows you that one of the things that illustrates is that in the rush to build ships for the war, because we were starting from almost zero, in that after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, all the combatant nations agreed to get rid of their fleets, which the United States did, but nobody else did, of course. So and then came the Great Depression, and we weren't building anything anyway. So they were latching on any shipyard anywhere that thought they could build one, and hence the supervisor of shipbuilding office to keep track of these little yards, and make sure that the ships were being properly built. So in any event, that was quite an introduction to the art of guiding shipyards. I thought that we'd probably never give another contract to this particular company under the circumstances, but lo and behold, they shaped up, and I'll tell you about them a little more later. These 7 yards that we were assigned to service made a great diversity of boats and ships. They were none of them were really combatant ships. They were more to service big ships. Tankers, we made 3 types of tankers: oil, gas, and water. We did make some PC patrol boats that were like the Miami 63 footers, but had a little more armament on them. And that was made at another one of the 7 yards. Um, there were more tugs, there were cargo ships, um, and some wild things like swamp buggies. These are flat bottom boats, only drew about a foot of water, and had an airplane engine marked on tripod in the back of the boat that drove it. And you steered it by turning the tripod, directing the wind where you wanted it. Of course, you had to be a little careful because if you turn it too far, it'd tip you right over, right in the middle of the alligators. But these were used in swamps and the Everglades by the Army. There were buoy boats. There were just a huge variety of things, and all shapes and sizes. And then, but we did go back to Leesburg, Virginia, one more time, or actually twice more. But by this time, I was more of an integrated member of the crew, and so it was up to me to do one of the tests. The shipyard considered this a great chance for an outing for the members of the family members of the people who built the boat. So it was party time. Incidentally, we didn't have to come down the river the second time. They had apparently moved their facilities down to the mouth of the river where you wouldn't have to contend with all unhappiness from all of the fishing crowd. But anyhow, everybody was having a good time drinking and so on while we were trying to do our test. And I had to do a test on the anchor windlass, which is a fairly simple test. You drop the anchor, you pick it up with the anchor windlass, and that's about it. However, there is a catch to it. When you drop an anchor overboard, normally you expect it to hit bottom, and it does. But then there's one more requirement, and that is that you be able to let the brake on the anchor windlass stop its fall in flight. And the reason for that is, if you happen to drop the anchor in a spot in the ocean that's deeper than your chain is long, it's going to run right out to the bitter end and break off. And in which case you've lost an anchor, and that's a pretty doggone serious matter when you're at sea. So, unfortunately, on the trial, they didn't move far enough out in the bay to have enough water to really do this. I'd drop it, and before I could get down and reach the brake, it had already hit bottom. So I hauled it up a couple more times, and with the same result. Everybody was getting impatient. The drunks were beginning to razz me. Well, even my boss up on the bridge is hollering down, well, it's all the delay, let's get going. And I was about ready to go off, figuring what the hell is a dumb test anyway. And we had our machinery guy was an old hand, a really old hand. He was a warrant officer. And he was watching all this, and he saw I was about ready to leave the damn thing, and he came up to see me, and he said, "You don't pay any attention to all these other guys making all this hoorah and stuff. Those bastards," and he had a great language, of course. It's not their responsibility to see that thing works, it's yours. I mean, you go back and get that thing, get fixed. And boy, that was one of the best lessons I ever learned. I did. And what we did was, the obvious problem was that we just didn't have time enough to get the brake secured before it hit bottom. And rather than have the ship be moved away out somewhere in deeper water, why, I realized that there was a lot of slack in the system. It's like when you don't have enough oil in your brake, it'll go down almost the floor, and it takes you that much longer to get the brake on. So what I did was I tightened up on the brake till it was just almost, but not quite, touching the drum. And then I didn't have to make half a dozen turns. I only made like a turn or two, and then it was tight. And it did stop to fall, so in good conscience I could clear the test, and we went on. So that was one of the best lessons. I thought that many times when I was really stymied on something. Picture of an ATR. This one happens to be the 14. This was the party boat. You can see all the people on the aboard there. And I was up in the bow doing the anchor windlass test. This particular shipyard got off to such a bad start with all the troubles with the 14th coming down the river, the 13th. And they did, after that, they got their act together and they did an excellent job on the ATR 14, 15, and any more they may have produced beyond that. This is a picture of the ATR 15, but it's the same crew. That guy on the right is our leader, Lieutenant Tom Avison. The guy on the left is Charlie Bell, a warrant officer and a machinery expert. And the guy in the middle is, can't remember him. And here is a picture of a tanker that was built in the RTC and Mathis shipyard in Camden, New Jersey, one of our 7. Strangely enough, this is a 63-foot Miami ship, only it was built by Trumpy Yards. If you remember, Trumpy was the head of Sup Ships, Miami. This was his parents' family business. But anyhow, so we did about 3 of these things a week. And as I said,
they were pumping out that many vessels?
yeah, not that one shipyard, but of the 7, which we had to cover. And I was there for about 4 months, and we serviced about, what was it, 38 boats, ships. But then I got promoted. I finally made the lieutenant junior grade. Here's a picture of me showing off my new half stripe. This is a picture of the outlying yard group just before it was dissolved and merged with the groups from that worked the New York ship inspection service. The officers are in the front row. The man in the center is Captain Williams, who was the supervisor of shipbuilding for that whole region. The guy on his right, Lieutenant Avison, was the head of the test group on the seagoing tests that we just talked about in the previous segment, and I am on his right. The guys in the back row are all the civil service experts in their various fields who work primarily at the various yards. I don't have a similar group picture of all of the total forces that were a part of Sup Ships in Camden, New Jersey. That covered all of New York ship. About June or July of 1944, I was promoted to the big ships being built at New York ship itself, not the outlying yards. New York ship built during the war, most of all the biggest ships of the Navy. They did battleships, battle cruisers, big cruisers, little cruisers, submarines, even light cruisers with an added flight deck, which meant light aircraft carriers. And these came out in a steady stream. In fact, they held the world's record for the greatest tonnage of ships produced in 1 year of anybody in the world. It was a big operation. Picture of the New York shipyard building ways as it stood just before the big buildup in World War II. I've shown it because it's a good picture of the covered ways on the left-hand side of the picture. This is unusual. Most ways are not covered. They did it because they wanted to build regardless of the weather and the urgency of getting ships out for World War I in the beginning. The other categories are shown going across now. Now this would be expanded so ultimately it covered 2 miles along the east side of the Delaware River. Happy to be back with working with the turbines again. I'd first been exposed to as a brand new engineer college at GE where they were built. And so I got to work on some of those, of course. But also we did some extra things as well on occasion, just based on the ship. Mostly in the refrigeration and air conditioning areas. However, there was one big exception which was kind of fun. I was the launching officer for the cruiser Fall River. I thought maybe I was going to get to make a speech and break the champagne bottle over the bow, but unfortunately they already had somebody to do that. It was the mayor of Fall River, Massachusetts, and his wife. My job was, ahead of time, examine the bottom of the ship, make sure there were no openings that shouldn't be there, and then to also write down the ship on the ways and make another inside inspection once it was waterborne in the river.
Did you have divers that dived down and looked at the holes and all?
No, I just did the examination in the beginning before it got in the water.
Oh, okay.
And then a second one inside to see if there was any valves left open or anything like that. In other words, we did not want to have the damn ship sink in the middle of the Delaware River. However, I didn't make notice of it wasn't made clear on the flyers for the launching ceremonies that I had anything to do with it, which was kind of disappointing. But anyhow, it was fun. Oh, and by the way, the Fall River did not sink in the river. This time, however, I was getting a bit tired of inspecting ships on the ways. Not very exciting. So I applied for Naval Architecture School at the University of Michigan. It's a 3-year postgraduate course, and I thought if I was accepted I might stay in the Navy, and because I was getting some pretty interested in naval ship design. However, the Navy didn't accept me, and the reason was I hadn't been to sea. So that got me thinking about that, and I decided I really wanted to go to sea, at least, before I left the Navy. I wanted to have that experience. So I applied for sea duty and asked for a heavy cruiser. I'd just been inspecting the USS Bremerton, and I hoped maybe to be assigned to that. However, the Navy response was to line me up for a whole bunch of more training courses to get ready for sea, but they didn't say anything about what ship maybe. So, okay, so the first thing I went to was a 2-week course in oil burning, which is means boilers. And these Navy courses are really a great way to conduct, I thought, adult education. What they give you is they tell you about what they're going to do. They then show you what they're going to do, and then you do it. And they have the equipment there. You actually operate the boilers and learn something about the theory and so on. And it goes through, it's 8 hours a day, it's one subject. And when you're through, you're presumably go on to your assignment with boilers, and everything gets solidified there because you're going to put it right to use. So that was a pretty neat course, and as it would turn out, a very valuable course to me. The next thing he sent me to was a damage control course. The Navy had lost a bunch of ships in the Pacific, particularly in warfighting, surface ships with Japanese fleet. And so damage control was a way of trying to avoid the ship sinking and allow it to be rescued. Obviously, you can get shot up pretty bad in your superstructure, and then you aren't going to sink. What really determines when you sink is what happens usually is you start to list from damage below the waterline, and that progresses until you get to the tipping point, and then it tips over. And if it's a capital ship, the big guns fall out of their turrets at the bottom of the ocean. And that's like the fat lady singing at the harbor. It is over. Mm-hmm. So the problem is to avoid listing beyond the point of return. And there's quite a lot you can do about this. And the British had started this kind of research earlier in the war because they were the first to really get into this. And but as usual, we really formalized it and did it a little further along. You've got things you can shift around. You've got fuel tanks on both sides of the ship. You can transfer fuel from one side to the other. And you got watertight compartmentation, which allow you to restrict the amount of the ship that gets inundated with water. And so the trick is to by shifting the weight around to keep the ship from listing too far. But there is always a catch on that. If you do this to too great an extreme, and the water is not restricted well within the ship, when you tip it up the straight and you go a little past it, then the water all just flows from the side of the ship that was down to the other side, and you just go over further the other way. So it's kind of tricky, but with watertight compartmentation and some things you can do about plugging holes in your ship and so on, you can at least postpone